Shalom, Yisrael. My name is Yashar Yehuda, and the title of this video is The History of Ancient Israel and Judah. Again, that's the history of ancient Israel and Judah. All right, before a monarchy was established in Israel, the land was divided by 12 regions, by the tribes. And those regions were ruled over by judges, or in the Hebrew, the word for judges is shoftim. The period of the judges lasted from the 14th century BC through the 11th centuries BC. During these centuries, the Israelites were at war with the Edomites, the Philistines, the Midianites, and the Canaanites. Eventually, the people of Israel grew tired of being ruled over by the judges, and they wanted a king like the Gentile nations had over them. And you can reference that in scripture in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 19 and 20. And this is 1 Samuel here. Verse 19 reads, "Nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel and said, 'Nay, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles.'" All right, so this is the people growing weary of the judges that were ruling over them, and they wanted a king like the Gentile nations had over them. All right, so the last judge was Samuel. And this prophet, he anointed the first king over Israel, the United Kingdom of Israel, who was King Saul. All right, so King Saul, as the first king of Israel, was anointed again by Samuel. King Saul ruled over Israel from 1047 BC through 1012 BC. The young shepherd David, who was initially favored by King Saul, after having slayed the Philistine giant Goliath, had to flee from the presence of King Saul due to Saul's jealousy and attempts at David's life. So King Saul and his son Jonathan would later be killed in a battle with the Philistines. All right, so David, hearing of the death of King Saul, returned with his loyal soldiers, who were referred to as mighty men in the scriptures, and they conquered the south of Israel from the Jebusites who controlled Jerusalem at that time. And David made Jerusalem his capital. King David then moved north and defeated Saul's other son, named Ishbosheth, who had ruled Israel for 2 years from 1012 BC to 1010 BC. King David spent much of his 40 years of reign as a king from 1040 BC to 970 BC, waging war on many of the Canaanite city-states within the surrounding borders of Israel. All right, his son Solomon succeeded him. And Solomon was renowned for his wealth and wisdom and building the Most High's temple. So Solomon reigned from 970 BC down to 931 BC. Following Solomon's death, the 10 northern tribes rebelled, establishing the city of Samaria as their capital city, while the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi remained loyal to Solomon's son Rehoboam. Okay, so during the time of Solomon's last days of rulership, he received a prophecy that Jeroboam would end up taking the kingdom from his son. So at that time, Solomon made attempts at the life of Jeroboam. So Jeroboam, which was the future king of the northern kingdoms, had to flee to Egypt to receive protection from Pharaoh Shishak, from the king of Solomon, from the king named Solomon. Upon Solomon's death, Jeroboam returned, or he left Egypt and he returned to Israel to establish his kingdom in the north, in the northern parts of Israel. Pharaoh Shishak saw an opportunity to attack a divided kingdom of Israel and Judah, and he attacked King Rehoboam in Rehoboam's 5th year of his reign as king of Judah. The Pharaoh Shishak attacked with more than 60,000 men, making Judah a vassal state to Egypt. Egyptian influence ended over Judah when an Egyptian-backed Ethiopian army defeated in circa 891 BC by the Judean king Asa, who ruled from 911 BC down to 870 BC. The Ethiopians and Egyptians had an army of 1 million men, according to 2 Chronicles 14 and 9. So we see here in 2 Chronicles 14 and 9 that there came out against them, which is the kingdom of Judah and their king Asa, Zerah the Ethiopian, with a host of 1,000,000, which is 1 million men, and 300 chariots, and came unto Marasha. All right, so we see that the two kingdoms of Samaria in the north and Judah in the south would continue to wage war against one another and have disdain and hatred for one another, although they were brothers. And this happened all the way up until the coming of the Assyrians, which came to conquer the northern kingdom of Samaria in 722 BC. Hoshea was the northern kingdom of Israel's last king. He had decided to stop his tribute to the Assyrians, thinking that the Ethiopian dynasty of Egyptians under the pharaoh Pianki would support him, but the Ethiopians failed to support him. So the Assyrians conquered Samaria and deported a vast number of the people of the northern kingdom. And you can read about how these people, how so many of the people of the northern kingdom were taken away captive, and they left the land pretty much isolated. It was only a remnant of the people that they ended up leaving in the land of the northern kingdom. And that's found in 2nd Esdras chapter 13, verse 40 through 45. I'm going to read some of that right quick. All right, verse 40. And it says, "Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hoshea or Hosea the king, whom Shalmaneser the king of Assyria led away captive. And he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country, where never mankind dwelt, that they might keep their statutes, and they never kept in their own land. And they entered into Euphrates by the narrow places of the river. All right, verse 45. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half, and the same region is called Assyrian. All right, so that is describing the land of America, Assyrian. And so this is telling you that these people of the northern captivity, they decided to leave that region that was controlled by the Assyrians, and they left by boat. And this boat ride took a year and a half to get from that region over to the Americas. So we have these people of the northern kingdom establishing or leaving that region, coming into the Americas and establishing their own different tribes over here, which was known as the Indians, or misnomered as many of the Indian tribes. All right, so back to the history of the southern kingdom now, the kingdom of Judah. So the last king of the southern kingdom of Judah was named Zedekiah. He reigned from 597 BC to 586 BC. He was installed by the Babylonians as a puppet king, but he rebelled against the Babylonians, at which point Nebuchadnezzar II laid siege and conquered and destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BC. And Nebuchadnezzar took Judah away captive for 47 years until the Persians conquered Babylon in 539 BC. Under the Persian Empire, the Judean captives were allowed to go back to Jerusalem and begin reconstruction of the temple, which was completed in 516 BC. So there you have the 70 years of captivity from 586 BC down to 516 BC. This was mentioned by the prophet Jeremiah. All right, next we have the Macedonian Edomites, which attacked Israel under the Seleucid Empire in 170 BC. And their king was named Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And this particular individual, this Edomite Macedonian king, he caused our temple to be desecrated by erecting inside of the temple a statue of the god Zeus and offering up swine inside of the temple. So we had some Levites by the name of the Maccabees that revolted against these Greeks and ousted these Edomite Macedonian Greeks in the year 164 BC. But later on down the line, we had some of the Macedonians that decided to convert these Edomites that they had conquered in 129 BC. So that he converted en masse the Idumeans, and he had them convert to the Judean religion, to our faith. And that backfired on us because in the year 37 BC, the Edomites took over control and rulership over Israel. And they ruled Israel from 37 BC all the way up until the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And they did this with the help of their cousins, their kindred, the Romans. And again, that was 70 AD, and we had the various Herods that ruled over Israel as kings, and they had the support of their brothers again, the Romans. And we know that the Romans again destroyed Jerusalem. They pillaged the temple. They carried away the menorahs and the holy objects, and they slaughtered and murdered over 1 million Israelites at that time in 70 AD. So again, that is a brief history of the kingdoms of Israel. The kingdom of Samaria in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. Shalom.